Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International as we go on to represent the first APAC team at LAN here. We'll be seeing Fullscreened going up against 40K. I'm Jack, and joining me right now, we've got Sloot, Zyronic, and Sours here. And at this point, Fullscreened, a little bit newer to the tournament here, Sloot, and at this point, they're really focusing on these first series here and really trying to make a great impression.
Yeah, I mean, making a great impression. I laugh because we had a chance to talk to the team. I mean, it was pretty last minute. They've had minimal practice time, as I think you guys mentioned just before the break. And I asked, what's your goal in the tournament? We asked all the teams, what's your goal? Do you want to win? Where do you see yourself placing? They're like, man, we just want to win a game. I was like, all right, let's do it. So they're not expecting too much of themselves, but certainly they are taking it seriously in the sense that they do want to win. They're going to try their best, but they do feel that they're at a pretty substantial disadvantage over a lot of the teams. Yeah,
and I think one advantage that they do have is that they are going to be going up against 40K, who has had a little bit of roster issues themselves. But it also starts looking at, as we take a peek at this bracket, Method NA, we haven't seen them yet here, Sours, but based off what we've seen so far, they probably have the most favorable upper bracket spot here.
Yeah, this lower half of the bracket looks a lot less intimidating, I think, than the top half of it. But who knows? 40K, these guys are very good players. And, throughout the cups, they were improving every single time. And while they did have to make one last-minute swap for the cup, their players are all very skilled. And I expect to see a good showing out of them. And Buff or Nerf Rogue has not been a team to scoff at either. I think that the Taiwanese team here can also be very impressive.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting point is we've seen how they've played throughout the cups, but also where they start improving and where these teams start, learning to develop their skills a little bit further. I mean, when we talk to them as well as Ironic, 40K in particular went from playing some pretty memey comps and a couple off-meta classes into just fully embracing that meta and then rolling with a lot of the strategies.
Yeah, if I remember properly, they played Shadow Priest and Demon Hunter in the first time trials, and their first cup run, trying to run meta wasn't good because they weren't practiced on it, but we saw them slowly through the cups get better and better and better, and they got good enough to where they actually made it to LAN. Now, unfortunately, they did have to replace one player due to some unfortunate issues, but fortunately for them, it's a DPS player. All they got to do is know that's my mark that I have to kick, and maybe I got to stun and ring a piece here and there, but it's not too difficult for a DPS player, honestly.
DPS, Jack, am I right?
I know, man. Nice Sloot. And now we're going to be taking... that took a little bit of time. Got
to build suspense.
That's true. I didn't know if you were going to be coming back to me or not.
Nah, man, I got the milk.
But you always do, just like your Avenger shield, Sloot. And now we'll be swinging it over to Thist on the inside scoop on the players.
Thanks, Jack. So, Fullscreened found out they had to be coming to this tournament with about 2 days to spare, and then they had to replace a member. And it was getting pretty dire. It got to the point where they would basically take anyone. Luckily, they found Slor with 1 day to spare, and luckily enough, he already lived in Sydney. So he basically walked here. 40K's lineup is also a little bit different right now. They had to replace a member too, but they're completely unfazed. And I quote, "They were nervous, but now they think they're just gonna lose." And that's a bold strat, and I'd really like to see how that plays out. Now, then, that's all from me. Back to the desk.
A bold strategy indeed. Thank you so much for that one, Thist. And maybe they're not going to be playing as close as we thought there, Sours.
Well, both teams can't lose, okay? Only one of these teams can lose.
Well, I got nothing else to do.
Well, the thing is, if both teams lose, that means the viewers win, so we should have a good match here.
Oh, I don't see King's Rest in this matchup here. What do you mean?
Not
well,
yet. Shrine of the Storm. So.
That's true. That's true. We've had a lot of fun with Shrine of the Storm in particular, especially as it's been the bane of the Eastern region here. But I think we've got some pretty favorable affixes here, some pretty relaxing affixes for a lot of these teams. I mean, if they get the Shrine, it's going to be Fortified, Bursting, and Volcanic. I mean, that's about as nice and warm and fuzzy as they can get, Sloot.
Yeah, I mean, Shrine is just a mess in general. But all the teams are so scared of wiping early to it, because as soon as you wipe in that dungeon pre-third boss, you're just all the way back at the start. But, the focus for me and the interesting thing, Jack, is the Freehold coming up first. It's funny because Fullscreen said Freehold is their best map, but a lot of the teams, when you ask them not what the worst map is, but what has some of the worst affix combinations of the tournament, a lot replied with Freehold, with this Bursting Sanguine.
Yeah, with so many mobs that you have to be able to deal with that are increased in health, increased in damage, the fact that Sanguine increases their HP or heals them based off of their max HP, which is further increased by Fortified, it can make it a really big pain, especially even if they're in a very wide open space here on Freehold. Their Sours would be kind of a pain. A lot of kiting.
Yeah, Sanguine is terrible affix, really. It's so awful when you see a mob just kind of, oh, I'm gonna, check my watch and take a sip of coffee and just heal all the way up to full HP whenever they feel like it, especially with a lot of the caster mobs and ranged mobs in Freehold. Love to take a nice long bath in those, and bursting is also such a nasty affix.
I mean, I agree with you. Like, Sanguine's a pain in the butt for sure, but in most situations you can outplay it. Now, is it fun to outplay and to play it? Sure, a lot of players, maybe not their favorite affix, but you are in control a lot of the time on where you position, where you kill the mobs. I think the bursting in Freehold is what a lot of players are scared of, because everybody wants to go as fast as possible. We do see Lofa's breaking out the Unholy DK as well. Not too much of a surprise knowing the cup play that we've seen. A lot of Unholy DKs rotating on this dungeon.
It's been almost every single time from a lot of these Western teams. And let's also shine a little bit of a spotlight on Ataque here, Zyronic. He is going to be that fill-in player for Forty-K, since we didn't have Lizelle able to make it for us. So having him in the Monk spot, it seems like it might be a little bit more easy rather than having it onto a Rogue. Yeah,
a little bit of background on Ataque. He's definitely a top-tier player. He's in the Guild Scrub Busters, so he's definitely a good player just in terms of pedigree alone. He's a Warlock player, so Warlock players are pretty smart players, so they can play pretty much everything.
Is that right?
The thing about Monk is it's not really that bad. You hit your clones, you kind of spin a little bit, maybe you throw your fists out every now and then, and you're good to go.
They have to make sure they're spinning to win unless they catch some fists from Fist as we start up game 1 here between Fullscreened and Forty-K on Freehold.
Zyra, just listening to you there for a moment, I already know now how to play Monk perfectly. You just push your DPS buttons forehead. But Fullscreened right off the bat here, aggressive pump with all 9 mobs at the start. Of course, we have their Bloodlust already popped on the left side of the screen. Forty-K doing a more traditional route that we've seen during the cup play, going all the way upstairs and looking to proc that first reaping into Sky Captain Craig.
Yeah, and of course the thing to look out for here is, like we mentioned earlier, that Sanguine control here. We need to make sure that they're not leaving any mobs in Sanguine for too long, extending the pole even longer than it needs to be. And like you mentioned, of course, both teams popping Bloodlust. It's a fortified setting. They want to make sure they're getting these mobs down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, a lot of taxation on the Druids as well with that bursting coming in. There's just such a high mob density in this dungeon. You want to kill as quickly as possible, but you got to pace yourself with the bursting coming in, as we see a lot of damage coming for Fullscreened right now. No problem for Keg, as he does manage to heal the group up, and they do escape near death for Rulo as he charges back in, killing the last couple mobs there as Forty-K kiting around in circles, making sure to stay out of that Sanguine and finish the mobs off in a nice kind of spread manner to control that bursting. 3-4 stacks is already starting to hit the limit for some of these teams, as we see some low dips for Fullscreened right here, but they finally finish off the last mob and are getting ready to move over to Sky Captain Craig's room.
Yep, that's that bursting definitely coming into play there. Really need to make sure you're not killing too many things close together, because the bursting does stack. It makes you take increased damage the more it stacks up, so just really need to look out for that for these teams.
Yeah, just to remind, of course, bursting does have that 4-second damage over time component, as Zyronic mentioned, does stack up, and we do have those Sanguini Panini pools that drop. Every time a mob dies, any trash that sits in it or bosses will be healed per second in players' damage, so that's why you kind of see the tanks running around in circles constantly as the trash is dying low. They don't have a lot of mob control. You do have the bump from that Ring of Peace on both sides and an extra grip to spare for 40k. You have the Typhoons coming in for the Druids as well, but you can't just spam these, so you have to make sure that you're kiting and killing properly. 40k has now started with that first Reaping Pack on Sky Captain Crag, about to transition out of the first phase at 75% as we see him dismount that Parrot.
Yeah, and of course, this is kind of what I want to see from Sky Captain Crag. Can Ataque actually keep up with Spider on that Monk there? Because really what the Monk is in the group for, it's for two things. Number one is to take that, it's to put that physical damage taken buff on everything so that the Rogue can do more damage, and the tank as well for that AoE damage. But it's mainly for single target damage. Usually the Monk is kind of the great equalizer. The Rogues and the Unholy DKs are going to be doing as much AoE damage as possible, and the Monk's going to be like, okay, what has more HP? I'm going to hit that.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly not in there to monkey around, but both sides do have access to that Windwalker right now, so it's really actually the lack of the second Rogue. We'll have to see if Lofus's AoE damage that a lot of these Unholy DKs are brought for in terms of AoE burst damage on the trash is able to make up. But, you know, it's interesting, Zara, we always talk about the Unholy DKs and taking advantage of that AoE damage, cleaving it on top of a boss, etc. But because of bursting, it's a bit more limited in these dungeons with how much they can just kind of mass pull together, because they do need to spread their kills, so it kind of diminishes the power of the Unholy just a bit here.
Yeah, and of course that's mainly going to be limited to pulling Reaping into other trash packs. They can use that extra Reaping as kind of a battery for the Unholy DK to do even more damage. But they'll get the trash mobs to maybe, 30% health or something like that, and then they'll have to take care of their bursting after that. If they end up pulling any Reaping waves into bosses, they don't have to worry about bursting at all, so it kind of works out in that aspect.
Should be no problem for them, as 40k does dip to the single digits of percent on Skycam Crack. Doing well to dodge that last parrot swoop coming across the arena. Don't want to get hit and bumped by that. Even though we're in a fortified setting, it does a fair bit of damage. So players moving well out of the way. Skycam Crack finally falling here for 40k as they move over, getting ready with, I believe, Wolf Disco will likely pull the Enforcer down by the bridge to the side as the rest of the team safely moves past. And no, they won't. They're actually just Typhoon it into the side, run past, and likely Shadow Meld it off on the bridge. You don't often tend to kill that mob. It's just a big waste of time.
Yeah, like one of the things we always have been harping out throughout the entire Cups is efficiency, mob efficiency. Typically, the only thing you ever want to be single targeting down is a boss. If there's ever a pull where you're killing 1 or 2 mobs at a time, that's really inefficient. You don't want to be doing that. So we see teams doing these mass pulls and then pulling mass pulls into even other mass pulls, just making sure they're being efficient. But you see Fullscreened getting incredibly low on Sky Captain Crack here.
Yeah, I mean, that was really dangerous. Coxie got down to 1%, proc the cheat death, and just re-dipped again. So managed to cheat death there, but the second rogue procking it as well. Not going to have availability of that cheat death for 6 minutes now on either side, leaving them particularly vulnerable for the rest of the trash coming up. And Bursting does not care what target it's on. It will get on top of the entire group, so those rogues will be particularly spicy for the rest of the dungeon, or for the remaining 6 minutes coming up on the dungeon, as 40k has done a pretty substantial pull here. Tree of Life has been busted out here by Igloo, making sure to keep the team nice and healthy as they once again slowly kite out of this Sanguine and make sure to keep the Bursting in check.
Yeah, you see that big burst of AoE damage right away, getting everything incredibly low, but once they get kind of low, they're kind of just making sure they're only killing off a couple mobs at a time, just so they don't stack that Bursting too high. Ooh. They do unfortunately kite through the Sanguine a bit, healing several of the mobs 30-40%. That's definitely going to increase the amount of time it takes to finish this pull off. But other than that, the bursting was good at least, you know.
That's true. I mean, more health takes longer to kill. You are on point with that. But, you know, it was kind of unfortunate. It's what Sours was mentioning earlier. Yes, you can control, but they just got in an unfortunate situation where Blind Range was being cast as one of the Sanguine came down right now. Bit of trouble here for Fullscreen right now as they eke through the side, making sure to Ring of Peace the mobs out of the Sanguine as well.
And I do want to mention as well on that pull, their knockback for that Sanguine was out of queue on the Monk. Maybe that just comes with a little bit of less, you know, familiarity with playing that class. Maybe he was like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to bring a piece of that. That's my job.
I was probably pressing his Shadow Bolt button or whatever it was there. I don't even know how you play Warlock these days anymore. 40k now proccing their second Reaping, wasting absolutely no time and grabbing it on top of the 2 councils for the Council of Captain. Now, in the particular rotation that we have here, I believe we have Raoul and Jolly, so a bit easier now. Not only are we not in Tyrannical, but Eudora's kind of coveted as the most dangerous boss of the 3. She will not be present right now, so they really will just have to move out of Raoul's Barrel Smash and make sure that Jolly Saber is quickly reabsorbed.
Yeah, of course, other than that, I mean, you can kind of see the value of that Unholy DK here. Massive burst damage, taking that AoE damage, turning it to battery into single target damage. They kind of chew through the first 30% of the boss in the first 20 seconds here. Now, of course, it's going to fall off a little bit after that, but being able to instantly do all that damage right away, just a huge boon for them that Fullscreen doesn't have available.
No, they don't have available, and Fullscreen is moving really a bit too safe right now. I mean, they got 2 mobs, you know, they're trying to finish off the rest of the pack that they just pulled. They did finally string it into a few neutrals on the side, but everything's just a bit slow for them. And, you know, no deaths on the board because they're just playing a bit too safe. So hopefully they can kind of crank it up and start catching up to 40k, who is now at 20% on Jolly, 40% Raoul, and of course has already had their second Reaping at 40%. Looks like Fullscreen on the left side's rearing up for a pretty substantial pull as they did mark the Buccaneers on the side, making sure to get interrupts on them and get also interrupts on the cast from some of the brine scales, making sure that the tank doesn't get too much damage or that none of the frontals leak on the group.
And I just want to say, beautiful movement of the boss mobs from Rotari there. Both of the tanks got hit by the damage dealing brew twice there, which is just so good for efficiency that they killed that boss so quickly.
Yeah, brew control is absolutely just crucial for that boss in terms of efficiency. As you mentioned, 40k does start to move around the side now. Rentari seems to dip up to the top. Looks like they're rearing up to do a pretty substantial pull and get ready to get to close to, if not fully proc, their third Reaping wave right now. I believe there's about a 12 mob pull here on the side. A few casters in here as well. We already get the stuns out in the forms of shockwaves and the leg sweeps coming in from Adaku as well. But mobs are now at half. We've seen the Tree of Life popped here from Resto, and I mean, once again, they're going to get these mobs as low as you said before. You see the Unholy DK just doing so much work right now, and then they're going to start to control and backpedal it towards the Ring of Booty to make sure that you're out of that Sanguine.
Yeah, and of course, not to mention kiting towards the Ring of Booty, but like, yeah, the kiting, it definitely spreads the mobs out just to make sure that they don't run through any Sanguine. The lower mobs are going to stay in the back. They're going to make sure the lower mobs are behind everything else. They'll kill those first, and then there'll be a nice little line of Sanguine for their kite path, and it looks like they're doing it perfectly here.
Yeah, they do actually refresh the 3 to a 4 stack, so it got Lofus a bit low, a bit of a DPS braining going on there, as Jack and I like to refer to, but they did finally finish off the rest of the mobs, brought them to the middle of the ring. Igloo is finally healing everybody else up. He has a little bit of a drink here, throwing the Fish Feast on the side as a few more mobs are pulled in from Rentari. All the neutrals on the side, these do give indeed percent, so they're likely looking to proc their 3rd Reaping Wave and drag it on top of Ludwig von Tortollen, which will be spawning in the Ring of Booty momentarily. Fullscreened, starting to catch up a bit, but they still haven't killed their 2nd boss, so they're actually looking to do the 3rd boss second and kind of do a bit out of order versus 40k right now. But finally, first death coming in from them right now. Battle res goes up immediately. A lot of damage coming in on Rula as he starts to backpedal kite these mobs right now and get whatever help he can with the Ring of Peace.
Yeah, and I mean, they're just kind of so far behind in the dungeon at this point. Just they're the same trash percentage or so, but they're an entire boss behind. And really, all it's going to take for them to win this match right now is kind of catastrophic failure from 40k. And 40k is actually looking really strong, even with a substitute. Their monk is definitely doing a lot of damage. Look at Adacu's damage right now. He knows what he's doing on that class, to a certain extent. Now, we did mention he's a smart player, so I'm not really surprised on my end. But, it doesn't look like it's holding them back at all.
No, I mean, like, the caliber of these players is not rocket science to get these classes. Now, to master them and constantly practice day in, day out on them is a different story. So, Adacu just showing his prowess, being able to pick this up on the fly. But there are some stuff inside and out that he will be at a disadvantage of compared to some of the other Windwalkers that have just been practicing for days and days, even weeks for this tournament right now. Spider does go down. Speaking of Windwalkers on the side of Fullscreened, just shy of their 3rd Reaping Wave being proc. They don't have the battle res available. It should be ticking over in just a moment as they finally get it available to them. He died about 10 seconds before the next charge came up, so immediately it goes up. Spider is back up as they look to finally get through Ludwig von Tortollen. Now, of course, he usually could release had the Council of Captain Bosses been killed, but it was not, so their checkpoint would have been all the way back at Sky Captain Craig.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an MDI land without a monk, with an Australian monk to death. But yeah, they popped their Bloodlust on Ludwig here, which maybe a little bit questionable, but it is a fortified setting, so I can kind of see a reasoning for it. But 40k looks like they're saving it for something even bigger later on.
I mean, yeah, this is a bit of a questionable Bloodlust for sure. All you're really getting out of it is just cleaving this Reaping Pack, which is oftentimes a non-factor, down faster, and getting Ludwig down just a bit faster. But, where in a fortified setting is probably they could have made more work out of some kind of maybe trash combination with a boss or just a heavier trash pull. Nonetheless, I'm sure they have planned this out perfectly and perhaps are aiming to have one available to them at the end of the dungeon. 40k not holding on at all right now as bursting ticks them really low, but they don't care. All of them sub 10% right now. Igloo finally getting a drink in as they prepare to pull the next round.
Calculated. That was calculated. 100% calculated. But, once again, not going to the boss. They're just going to pull some more trash, and this might be a big enough pull for them to pop their Bloodlust on. I'm just kind of curious what they plan on using their Bloodlust on here. This is a huge pull. 3 trash mobs. Igloo does go down, but he is able to release because, like you mentioned, the boss checkpoint is right there. He'll be back in like 5 seconds, so they don't have to use their battle res. This is a huge pull. They're still not using their Bloodlust. What are they planning on using it on?
Adacu goes down as well. Lofus in a lot of trouble as well. Had to use his personals and finally gets healed up by Igloo, who popped Tree of Life the moment he got back in right now, trying to stabilize the group. Adacu needs to get back in as quick as possible. Their cooldowns only last so long, and they need to kill the rest of this pack before Rentari runs out of gas and is unable to pop any defensives. Finally, a Harpoon comes in on Igloo, gets gripped into the group, but no problem for him. That was not in a pool of Sanguine, so just manages to regrowth the rest of the group to health as they slowly kite it back into the ring where Trothek, the 3rd boss of the dungeon, does await them. It looks like they're going to maybe try and stabilize first before pulling the boss, because that was a bit scary. 2 deaths on the board right now for 40k, so a bit of a slip up there.
Yeah, but the thing is that their pull didn't fall apart, right? They were able to put it back together. They didn't full-on wipe, just 2 extra deaths, but no battle res committed. So, I mean, they're not really in that bad of a position. That was kind of a little bit of a scary situation for them. Now, I'm not sure if they're going to want to pull the boss with all that Sanguine in the room, but there you go. They're just going to pull the boss with the Reaping, and we're going to see that Unholy DK go down, but the healer's so low!
He's so low, gets to 2% health. Finally, the bursting stacks wear off, and he manages to stabilize. The Bloodlust has been popped here for 40k, and what I was pointing to there, Zyres, Rentari actually had popped his shield wall at the very end of that trash with only 2 mobs left, so a bit wasted there. He was just, I guess, worried for his life, really, but a lot of it was wasted on 2 mobs that were not even in proximity of him, and within the last 2 seconds of that shield wall, he only then pulled Trothak. So a bit of a kind of a worry proc there, if you will, as they have about 10 seconds left on their Bloodlust. Trothak already down to 55%, and Fullscreened is now as well, starting on Trothak at 99% on the boss.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why Atiki was really full on AoEing the Reaping there, because you kind of want to use that for your Unholy Decay. You want your Unholy Decay to get as much AoE damage as possible out, which will then cleave onto the boss. And having a Windwalker Monk, which doesn't really gain any single target damage from that AoE, steal some of that damage, just kind of, kills the boss a little bit slower.
But it impresses us on the damage meters.
Ooh, wow, look at the damage he's doing.
My god, I'm blown away. Trothak 35% here for 40k. Already dealt with their 4th Reaping Wave, 86% on the board. Should be just enough trash at the end of the dungeon, of course, with a combination of the Ravagers there and all of the debuffs, not to mention the rain down of Cannonball Barrage from Harlan Sweet, the final boss of the dungeon. So many different paths they can take for the remainder of their trash percentage, and likely they will be aiming, of course, to skip that 5th Reaping Wave, as we see most teams do here. Fullscreen, not to be forgotten, is trying to keep up on Trothak, 55%. But after this, they will not only need to catch up on 14% trash, but head over and kill the Council of Captains boss as well. And Fullscreen certainly has their work cut out for them. And at this point, they're going to be hoping that 40k has a full wipe. They still have 2 battle reses available as well, because by virtue of Zyra, as you mentioned earlier, the 2 deaths that they had were fortunately very close to their checkpoint.
Yeah, and the thing is, right, because they have those 2 battle reses available, they can pretty much have anyone go down, except for, well, even the healer, actually, because they have the Unholy Decay.
Yep.
Anyone can go down, and they're probably going to be fine. I think the most dangerous portion of this dungeon for them is probably going to be some pull where maybe they would try to pull the trash pack next to the final boss, and maybe try to use those cannonballs to, defeat that pull. We've seen a lot of teams actually try to do that pull and have the boss just not cast his cannonballs at all, and they're kind of sitting there like, we kind of need those to kill this trash pack.
Our brave adventures, of course, traveling across the bridge, giving me visions here of the great ring to Mount Doom there. Now, they finally cross the bridge. Immediate stealth comes up, and they will likely just go straight to Harlan Sweet and get ready on that boss. It shouldn't. 40k. I mean, they don't know where the other team is. You guys mentioned it in the last series while I was in the back room, and the truth is, these teams oftentimes at home, they are used to having the second monitor up, having somebody letting them know where the other team is, but they don't have that luxury right now. So as far as 40k is concerned, they need to be full jets on at all times, because Fullscreen could be right behind them. But of course, Fullscreen has quite a ways to go to catch up to 40k at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, Harlan Sweet is definitely one of those encounters where there's really no danger here. They have to create the danger by pulling more trash into him. The boss damage isn't really that bad, and of course, once you get to 30%, the boss just kind of falls over. So we're not really going to see any of these players dropping it incredibly low unless they just decide to go stand in those fire patches there.
Yeah, I mean, the team just giving the sugar to Harlan Sweet right now, 71% on the board, about to enter that second phase at 60%. Igloo getting just a bit of damage there from some of the Cannonball Barrage. Now, it does take a pretty substantial time, I mean, just a few seconds for that first swirly to actually hit the ground, which is why you're seeing the team try to economize the space as much as they can getting in. Harlan Sweet now about to hit the second phase here, where the Cannonball Barrage will affect the entire team except for the tank, and he will also fire Slicing Wind in a 360-degree direction.
Yeah, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, the whole strategy that we've seen a lot of teams go with here is once he casts the Cannonball Barrage, it also does damage to the other mobs in the dungeon. That's why they're pulling them on top of the boss here. So next time when he does that Cannonball Barrage, which is right now, all of those cannonballs will hit the trash mobs pretty much instantly, dealing with them, and we see them do it almost perfectly. Just a little bit of health left there.
Now, we do know the danger, of course, coming down from these mobs, especially with the Enforcers in there on the tank. So we saw Rentari immediately popping that shield wall upon pulling everything, making sure that he was nice and healthy for the cannonballs coming in, which they're going to try to use to kill the remainder of the 2 Enforcers. But a bit of sloppiness here as the team actually branches off in various directions, and they're not able to finish off the Enforcers with that. Now, of course, they also don't want to proc the Reaping too early, so part of it was likely just to leave 1 or 2 mobs alive for the end of the dungeon. They are at 94% on the board. I'm actually not sure if those 2 Enforcers are enough for the 100%. They might still have to kill one more thing at the end. We'll have to see exactly where they get to it. But Harlan Sweet approaching quickly the 30% mark for that third phase.
Yeah, and of course, I kind of like them doing it early here, because that takes out any of the danger there, which is, the possibility of the tank dying. Pro Warriors with their cooldowns are incredibly strong. They can live through pretty much anything while they're up. But once those cooldowns run out, they kind of need to get out. And I think we've seen teams like Learn to Fly with Revo Fevi kind of sitting there tanking everything, but they had the boss below 30% when he had that 100% extra attack speed, and he wasn't able to tank it. So doing it before he gets that buff on himself in the 40 to 60% range is actually pretty smart from them.
Pretty smart indeed, yeah. And, you know, Harlan Sweet, of course, not the scariest boss in the world that you think about for tank damage. They do grab an officer pack here and a couple of Buccaneers. Of course, no Ravagers present here. They will be using this last barrage to just kill one of the Buccaneers, or two of the Buccaneers. They don't need to kill the officer for the remainder of their percent. Should obtain what's needed here as Igloo branches off to the side, making sure the team's nice and healthy. Harlan Sweet goes down here, and Forty grabs the first match in a, I want to say, obviously dominant victory, but certainly pretty sloppy from them.
40K getting that game 1 against Fullscreened, and in many cases we've seen a number of times the first games have been a little bit sloppier or having some simple mistakes they don't want to have, but at that point you just got to breathe a sigh of relief and start getting yourself ready for that game 2, Sours.
Yeah, like the feeling of being in these dungeons, it's not even like once you get the dungeon started, but when that dungeon starts at the beginning of your first match, you know, that can be a real like game-breaking moment for these teams. And neither of these teams really have much experience in a LAN setting like this, and so I don't think either of them maybe expected to even find themselves at this spot. So they performed, you know, fairly well overall. I think, you know, Forty obviously doing much better in their performance here than Fullscreened was able to. Forty having no real issues at all throughout the entire dungeon. They did have a couple of inopportune deaths, but they weren't anything that really affected their gameplay. They were able to recover quite well from them. You see the healer ends up going down here for the pool, but they've killed that second boss, and they're able to recover very well. They don't have, tank is at no risk of dying here, so they're able to quickly kind of recover themselves and position themselves to just do the rest of this pool smoothly. Now, they're not going to kill these mobs fast enough for the bursting to affect them, so they're able to recover and be just fine. And then from there, they can just clean up the rest of the bosses and go through the rest of the dungeon smoothly without having them to have no more mistakes from here on out.
And Rentari doing a great job of getting that 40k DPS or higher in so many of those pulls. Strong performance by them on that one. But looking at game 2 coming up, we're going to be going into Waycrest Manor with Tyrannical, Teaming, and Explosives. So a lot of potential for some very big pulls here, Zeronic, but there's so many threats out there as well.
Yeah, Teaming Waycrest Manor on its own is pretty nasty, and then you throw an explosive as well for some target swapping. It's pretty disgusting. These affixes are not fun at all. And Tyrannical in a dungeon, in the only dungeon actually with 5 bosses in it, this is going to be a long dungeon, and it's going to be very scary for both of these teams.
Well, especially as we're looking at Fullscreened, who, as we mentioned, had a pretty sloppy performance there on the Freehold in general. How they're going to be able to handle that, and having such strong focus on any of the explosives can be really nasty, Sloop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know if sloppy is the right word for Fullscreened. Safe, too conservative. I mean, both teams had 2 deaths aside, and, you know, Fullscreened was just a boss and a half behind, really, by the end of the dungeon. So they just need to kind of amp it up and get outside their comfort zone. Now, getting outside the comfort zone might end up in some pretty sloppy situations, especially in Waycrest Manor. This is a nasty dungeon. Tyrannical, we know how aggressive these teams want to be, pulling everything on top of the triad. It's going to be nasty, and it's going to depend where their explosives spawn, and if they kind of have some bad luck explosives out in the courtyard and they're overpulled, then that's all she wrote.
Yeah, we've seen it a couple times. We saw it on Toldagor as well, where some of those explosives were such a pain for teams. Didn't have any kind of wipes to them, but it's something that's ever present that you have to deal with. So you're not going to want to miss this one. We're going to hop over to a quick break before game 2. Don't go anywhere, guys. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International's Spring Finals, and with a lovely view of Sydney, Australia. Of course, if you'd like to support WoW Esports, you can always buy the Hoarder Alliance fireworks, or my favorite, the Transmorph Beacon on the in-game store. Proceeds will go towards the prize pool at the end of the year for both programs at BlizzCon. I'm Jack, and joining me right now for Game 2 between Fullscreened and 40k, we've got Sloot, Zyronic, and Sours here. And as we're looking at Waycrest Manor, we were kind of talking about it a little bit from the break here, Sours. There's so many threats that are going to be able to come out, and if Fullscreened starts amping it up and they start trying to push to get back into this and not play too safe, it could be very, very scary.
Yeah, teaming is such a nasty affix in these dungeons because it really changes up your routing in a way that no other affix really does. An explosive makes all of your pools a complete coin toss as whether or not you'll be able to survive them.
And they'll have to really focus their efforts there as we're going on into Game 2. 40k is looking to sweep this series and take it down early as we go into Waycrest Manor.
I certainly hope they cake it down, Jack. I would love some cake right now. But moving into Waycrest Manor right now, you know, Zyra, we've seen a couple of different pulls here, right? Some people just ignore the essences entirely. We're seeing 40k do just that. As these mass stealth upstairs to the left, we do know that entrance is always open on this tournament realm for this tournament particularly. Fullscreened did decide to just go with the traditional 7 pull at the start.
Yeah, we kind of see different routes based off of what teams are doing in terms of affixes. Because this is a tyrannical setting, they're going to want to use their Bloodlust on the boss, which we see Forty doing right here. They also pull a pack in so they can get some AoE off. Because the thing about this boss, Sister Selena's main ability, which is that MC, it will always go off, regardless of how fast you push her on this tyrannical setting. So kind of getting some free cleave, some free trash percent on the pull there, pretty nice.
But this is also one of the bosses that's particularly scary in the tyrannical environment. It can get out of hand for the healers, but they did manage to cleave her down quickly and get rid of that 50% decreased healing aura before moving on to a Milady, which they've now chewed through as well, making sure that the players are constantly moving to decrease damage over time from that aura. Shouldn't be very hard for this comp at all. Now, we do see Lofus actually has remained on that Unholy DK, and we don't know why, because we've seen a lot of action with that Unholy DK, the infamous 1 million DPS pulls in Rawl's room, but will be a bit harder to pull off, though, with of course, the explosive.
And they also pulled in more trash. This is just kind of helping fuel that unholy DK damage. So pretty much just making him do even more single target damage than he normally would, just free extra damage for them. I like the strategy that they have for this boss.
You know, the strategy is good and very aggressive. Always risky when aggressive, but it's working out for them right now. They've already climbed up 5% on the trash board. Fullscreen's 4% has come from those first 7 mobs right now. Sister Briar finally gets empowered for her first phase on Fullscreen, making sure that those jagged Tettles are healed through above 90% health so that the players don't dip too low. Something that we actually saw Wolf Disco on the side of Forty for that first round get just quite low, but no problem for them right now as they're chewing through the rest of Sister Selena's health, making sure to get rid of her before they move on to round 2 of Milady.
And kind of one of the reasons this boss is so dangerous, especially on these affixes, is that explosive affix. All 3 of the bosses can always spawn the explosives, so that's, triple the amount of targets for explosives that you normally have, 3 times the chance for these explosives to spawn. And if you're always spending time swapping to these explosives instead of doing damage to the boss, see 2 spawn right there, it just kind of makes the boss take even longer, and this is just a really dangerous boss in general.
Yeah, and Explosive is just a nasty affix, especially with some of the pulls that they're going to come up with teaming later, where you just have bad luck, you have good luck. You'd have a ton of them spawn in one haul, especially maybe you don't have some line of sight available because you can line of sight them, or maybe you just have none spawn and you're able to dedicate full force of DPS to whatever trash you have pulled. Now, Forty have dealt with the Triad and have moved on into the hallway. Now, this hallway particularly one of the most dangerous for tank incoming damage. These captains just do an immense amount of damage, not to mention if you throw any Vine Twisters in there or anything of the sort. It's a really big pull, a really offensive, aggressive pull coming in here from Rentari as he jumps in the middle of everything. Immediately, leg sweep comes down just to try and stabilize the situation. But we have a Rune Weaver in there as well and a Soul Charmer.
Yeah, actually, I think that's two Rune Weavers and 1 Soul Charmer. Sorry, couldn't find my words there. Now, something to mention as well in this dungeon is everything is kind of fixed, right? Top left door is open, which spawns are the same throughout the dungeon, but the witches that can spawn is still different. So you can, get the easy Rune Weavers and Soul Charmers, but typically speaking, those are the easiest things which we see them have here.
Yeah, actually, I think it's premeditated where the lieutenants spawn, so it was a rather aggressive but premeditated pull for them to grab these Rune Weavers, which do just an immense amount of damage in even in this tyrannical setting. They're pretty fortunate here with their explosives on the side, only getting about 2 up at once. The rogue is doing an excellent job making sure to keep those in check and cleave them down. Fullscreen has down the first boss as well, and it moved on to a much more modest pull, certainly with some of the side trash in the witch's room that Forty very efficiently grabbed and cleaved on top of the Triad.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to see that of them because you normally wouldn't see, your normal pug groups kind of go and pull 1 pack at a time. They are still definitely having some, interesting strategies they've come up with themselves. Unfortunately, pulling them separately isn't as efficient as pulling them into the boss and cleaving them down. But, they're definitely not just going with only safe strategies here.
Yeah, but for the sake of the tournament, it's just a bit too safe right now, as we do see that Ring of Peace finally bottleneck that doorway for Fullscreened right now. But a bit of trouble here for Forty as Lofus does go down. Immediate battle res comes up from Igloo, getting rid of their only battle res. They're not going to have one available for about 6 minutes now as they try to cleave down the rest of this pack. Now, this courtyard is one that you think about with particular danger in it, not just because of the massive amount of mobs, but because we are in that explosive affix that we keep mentioning. So it just gives so many extra chances for mobs to spawn. We see some of the bright blue glow around them as well, meaning some of the soul fetishes have been cast, and you have some immensely buffed trash here.
And they just lost a ton of time there. The problem with Unholy DK's AoE is it takes a little bit of time to set up. They've got to get their Death and Decay down. They've got to get some boils out. He died right at the point where he was about to start popping that AoE. So just increased the amount of time this pull would have taken almost exponentially. He probably should have done 2 or 3 times more damage there.
Yeah, exactly, and it just wasted a huge amount of time. And these Thorn Guards doing so much damage right now. The Blight Blue Glow, as mentioned earlier, the Soul Fetish cast from some of the witches on the side. When they die, they do pass a 5-stack on of damage and haste onto mobs. So you have 2 of those Thorn Guards with each buffed right now, so just immense amount of damage coming in on Rentari, but they do manage to finalize all of that trash. Grab a bit from Boralus Hall as well, a few unlucky explosives really spawn around the area as they make sure to drop everything in that fire and use the environment to their advantage. One of the explosives does leak out, but fortunately no deaths over on the side of Forty Fullscreen still chewing through the hall once again, very modestly but safely.
And of course, the big danger to these pulls, especially when you get into that hallway, which is that pack that they pulled out into this courtyard here, is there's so many of those maggots that will put that spit debuff on players, which is just extra nature damage over time. And it kind of goes on random players. So, one player can get 3 of those debuffs and take a massive amount of damage. It's just completely random, and it just adds to some of the RNG of these pulls.
Yeah, you certainly don't want a lot of that. Nobody likes to be spit on. Zyro's 40k now 39%, getting ready to proc their second Reaping, which they oftentimes you've seen teams take right on top of the Soulbound Goliath, the second boss, or it depends what order you're doing it, of course, but for this team, the second boss of the dungeon. They have procced it, and right in they go on top of Matron Brindle as well, who deals a pretty substantial amount of damage on the tank. We are in a tyrannical setting, so that Soulbound Goliath damage is going to get pretty out of control quickly because of those ramping damage stacks.
And of course, like you were mentioning, in that freehold, the rogue isn't even using Blade Flurry, not trying to do any AoE damage. On the side of Fullscreened, we have pretty much a full team wipe on that first Reaping wave here. Their heal is trying to kite it back to the main room for them, and they might get it off, but this is just a huge time waste for them.
That's a yikes right now as they spawn everything down in the hall. Shadow Smash is going down left and right from the immense amount of Reaping mobs that spawned with that first wave right now. Looking to stabilize. We have seen that Bonsomdi's bargain trinket finally proc from Rulo, of course, who had just fallen earlier. Not going to be available with that cheat death again for about 6 minutes now as Forty has stabilized all of the trash. Matron Brindle is still alive, and they've done a reset now on Soulbound Goliath, making sure that Rentari's not taking too much damage, but of course at the cost of a lot of AoE healing attention needed from Igloo on the group.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of something simple for them. They were able to use that Unholy DK for that burst single target damage on the boss, but because it's tyrannical, because they don't have the Bloodlust available, this is just going to take a long time. This is one of those kind of attrition bosses where, your tank's going to have to make sure he's not getting too many stacks, but he could probably get to a pretty decent amount of stacks. But when he does release those stacks on the group, you have to make sure healer's ready for it. It has to be able to AoE heal through all this fire. Yeah,
and the fire is taking down on the group. As you can see, the Soulbound Goliath does temporarily get not incapacitated, but disoriented right now. Igloo getting quite low on mana as well. A lot of taxation with that Reaping Wave plus the trash with Matron Brindle from the boss right now, so he's going to have to be careful and manage that. I mean, there's a lot of damage that comes out of this tyrannical boss right now, not to mention that once you do have the AoE reset with the fire going everywhere, you have to get away from the spirits on the side, so a bit of damage lost in the group can spread in the wrong directions during that. Soulbound Goliath, though, finally hitting 50% now as Fullscreened is just chewing through the courtyard themselves.
And of course, the thing about this boss is the only real danger of the fight is definitely going to be that fire AoE, and you can kind of pre-plan when you're going to do that. You can say, okay, I'm going to go into the fire now, everyone pop personal cooldowns. You don't really necessarily need to heal through it as long as everyone has their personal cooldowns up. And honestly, outside of that, the Thorns can happen, but if the Thorns go on the healer, he can shapeshift before it to not even get the Thorns at all if he's quick enough, and I would hope our MDI players are quick enough to be able to do that on 0 ping.
Yeah, and I mean, it's working no problem for them. Igloo still maintaining a relatively low amount of mana, but it is enough for the fight. I mean, the damage intake, if the tank can survive and rotate cooldowns and active mitigation properly, is fairly low, therefore not requiring too many resets of that boss right now. Fullscreened having just a bit of trouble. The rogues are very vulnerable right now. They do not have that cheat death available, either one of them, not to mention the tank, so anybody can just drop at any moment if they decide to overpull right now. Fullscreened themselves also dealing with 2 of those buff Thorn Guards. You can see that light blue glow from the Soul Fetish that was cast earlier, and they will be soon proccing their second round of Reaping, as hopefully the last round of AoE comes in for 40k, as Igloo is almost tapped on mana right now and getting quite low.
We saw all the personal cooldowns coming out. We saw the AMS from the DK as well as IQ using his Diffuse. They're just being really safe here, making sure they're only doing when they have their personal cooldowns up, so the low mana isn't an issue for them. And of course, Igloo's going back into cat form just to get a little bit extra DPS in there. Pretty solid cooldown management from them here.
Management indeed, and they're gonna have to buff up now. If we know anything from these teams and what we've seen during Cup Play Zyro, this hallway is going to be a huge pull. A lot of teams boast that they can pull this hallway all in one go, all of the maggots with random spit targets that we mentioned earlier, all the way into the kind of Huntsman Lodge, if you will, on the side with all the hunters and the hounds as well. So here we go. Rentari has popped his Swift Foot Potion and is going around the entire L-shaped hallway all the way into the room and line of sighting everything around the corner. A lot of damage going to be coming in here on the the group right now as Ring of Pieces drop to make sure that everything is localized. They're going to have to be really careful with all the explosives coming in right now as Igloo's already pre-popped Q-form and is making sure everybody's as healthy as possible. Spits going out left and right, and finally the mobs are starting to melt. Lofus gets quite down, but I mean, excellent job here from Igloo right now, keeping everybody almost above 90% at all times.
Yeah, I can't. That poll's insane. There are probably like 18 to 20 maggots on that poll, meaning at any time there are 18 to 20 spits going out, and if they miss a stun, they miss extra interrupts, they're just gonna die. You can't heal through 20 spit debuffs. So I think that was more of their like CC orientation, the Ring of Peace into some stuns that just really got them through that poll, and that was really good. We even saw Lofus going for more of probably a not as efficient AoE pull. He just wanted to make sure they got those maggots down as quickly as possible. He probably could have done way more damage if he saved his cooldowns, but he just went for a more efficient usage of them.
Now, unfortunately, we do have some of the maggots spawn on the side that we do know come from some of the peasants. Once they are killed, they spawn 3 of them. The 60% Reaping Wave has procced in. Here goes Forty right into Rawl's room, pulling absolutely everything in the room. Shield wall popped here from Rentari right now. 3rd Reaping Wave. Huge amount of explosives in the middle of the room. 3rd Reaping Wave on top of it. All of the trash in the room as well. They need to make sure everything's localized as everything comes together on top of them. Lofus going down solo. Bleeds going out left and right as well as they finally manage to stabilize. Explosives are well handled by Disco right now as the entirety of the group goes down. The Reaping has almost died and they stabilize everything. A Dinner Bell cast finally gets interrupted at the very last second. Huge amounts of damage coming out of Lofus to make sure to completely exterminate the pack here. Really well played here by Forty Zyro.
Yeah, that was solid execution. The only thing missing was the 1 million DPS, but he got up to about 800k, so
almost there.
It was pretty close. That was still pretty impressive. Good, just solid execution there, making sure everything got on the boss at the same time. They were able to AoE CC everything down. And Unholy DK just does his thing. He pops his boils and makes sure everything dies at the same time. And now all they have to do is deal with the boss really easy after that big AoE pull.
We've seen a lot of teams that what they do after this point is actually pull some of the kitchen on top of it. And yeah, they pull some of the kitchen on top of it. And then Zyra's poking me here, mentioning they didn't even pop their Bloodlust on this. So it's going to be interesting to see what they save it for. Possibly a pull combined with Lord and Lady Waycrest downstairs. They're only planning for 1 more on the rest of the dungeon. That is itself a very difficult pull as well. So I'm sure it's premeditated and they do know ahead of time where they want to pop that. But what I was mentioning, Zyra, is we do see some teams actually proc their 4th Reaping Wave on top of Rawl once they stabilize after that massive pull tube to just combine that Reaping Wave with what is an otherwise pretty sound boss.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about this boss, right? There's really not much going on after you kill that AoE pack. There's some, extra mobs that spawn, but you can kind of just cleave them down with clones, with Blade Flurry, and with the passive Unholy DK AoE. There's really not much danger to this boss. That's why you see them pull the Rune Weaver, and all they have to do is interrupt it and cleave it down.
Yeah, no, I mean, no problem for them. Certainly after that pull, it's a nice breath of relief for them. Fullscreened, of course, not to be forgotten, at halfway through their Soulbound Goliath pull, 42% on the board. Pretty much doing the same pathing as 40k, but at a much more modest pace. They're only about to down the boss in, I'd say, another minute or 2 right now, and then we'll see if they even decide to pull the entirety of the hall with the Maggot, something that 40k just did, and has set them certainly at a nice pace even further ahead in this dungeon as Rawl now dipping to his last 1/3 of HP. The Rune Warrior should be going down soon, and we're going to see if they end up proccing their 4th Reaping here in a moment.
Yeah, this pathing is definitely very interesting. It's like, well, I wouldn't say it's interesting. It's just kind of the thing that people have been doing. I believe Team D was the team that kind of pioneered this route on the first cup, and almost every other Western team that knew how to do it was like, oh, that strategy is like almost perfect. We're just going to steal that and do that better than anyone else does, so we can now win Waycrest Manor, and we see 40k doing it here, and doing it really well.
They would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you, Zyro. But 40k, 77% on the board. I'm not sure if they have any maggots left in the kitchen. That's usually what they use to proc that last 3% and get that 4th Reaping going. But it looks like they're just going to opt to kill the boss first and then proc the 4th Reaping with some other trash in the remainder of the dungeon. And of course, we are in that teaming environment, so plenty of extra trash present throughout the dungeon, but extra trash that you do need to kill to reach your benchmarks for Reaping, and of course that 100%. Soulbound Goliath finally 4% on the board for Fullscreened as they're about to finish off the fight and move over to Rawl's Maggot Hall. 40k downing Rawl himself and moving into the kitchen, getting ready to go downstairs.
Yeah, and they definitely don't have enough trash percentage to finish off their 100% if they go downstairs and do nothing else but, the stuff past the staircase. We'll have to see if they're going to do the trash now or take the less efficient route of maybe killing the final boss and then porting back up at the start of the dungeon to get the rest of their trash percentage. But they're gearing up to look like maybe try to skip here. Yeah.
Yeah, so the skip comes in, and you know, you say less efficient. Some teams do plan around having their Bloodlust come up just as they kill the final boss, Gorak, tool of the dungeon, and then pull some trash. But there was no way that's applying to 40k. They haven't even used the Bloodlust, as you mentioned, while I was going crazy on roll there with that massive, beautiful pull from 40k. But we're going to see if they ended up using it here as they pull all of the trash here. Lord and Lady Waycrest are pulled, and finally, as predicted, told you, the Bloodlust comes down from 40k. Really dangerous pull here. Got to make sure to move out of the candles as well that come down from a lot of the casting witches on the side. Mark Sisters getting runic marks out left and right. The Soul Charmer is the one that casts those candles, moving out of it perfectly, making sure that the mobs don't have a decreased damage and take a 50%. And I mean, they just rifle through this, man. Lofus just chews through everything.
And this is so good for the Unholy Decay. He doesn't, not only does he get the first initial burst of AoE damage, but he's going to get the second one when the Reaping Wave comes in. So he'll just keep pumping out that increased AoE single target kind of focused damage. So this is just so good for them. I was kind of wondering what they're going to do with that Bloodlust, and like you mentioned, this is it. And now here comes the second wave, all the Reaping coming down, and the DK is going to come again. Their tank did go down, but because they had the battle res available for them, they're going to be fine.
That was a sigh of relief there for me. Rentari has finally gotten back out there, making sure to rebuff whatever's applicable. Lofus, unfortunately, does have that Shadow Smash debuff for another probably 30, 35 seconds or so. It's a minute debuff if you get hit by one of the rings from the Lost Souls from the Reaping Wave, decreasing your maximum health by 20% during that. Not the most dangerous thing to have on a DPS, depending, of course, on what you're pulling. Certainly don't want that on your tank. Rentari did pay the price with his life there. I'm not actually sure if he got hit by it, but nonetheless did go down, managed to get that res up. They have no res available now for about 3.5 minutes, as finally Lord Waycrest is about to hit his remaining 35%, after which he will be refueled via Lady Waycrest's health, and she will join him in the middle of the room where they will die together. A beautiful love story.
Yeah,
certainly better than Twilight.
Definitely better. I think it really has to be pretty bad to be worse than Twilight. But moving on here, once Lady Waycrest does come down, you'll just have to get a little bit of extra interrupts in the fight. She just has one cast, that Racking Cord, that you need to make sure you're interrupting, and they actually let it through for the tank spell reflect more than likely.
Yes.
But you can just kind of cleave them down now. It's pretty simple at this point.
Yeah, and you know, Zara, you know, I especially always talk about this kind of more efficient strat of cleaving both bosses down together at equal amounts of health, because it's just more efficient to do it that way, but it is more mechanically difficult. Now, the difficulty of the mechanic for Lady Waycrest herself, just having a 2 melee interrupt rotation for her cast, really isn't a big deal, and her melee output is quite low, so the danger really just comes from leaving Lord Waycrest up long, but it looks like 40k can muscle it out and just deal with that and kill both of them at the same time.
Yep, and the thing to look forward after this point is where they're going to get their trash percentage from. We know that they have these what are they called, the horrors after this, I believe, that leap to their furthest target that do a lot of AoE shadow damage. So we'll have to see if they're planning on pulling those and then something else later on. But they definitely have about 8 or 9% more trash percent they have to get after that. So we'll have to see where they go from here.
Lord Waycrest finally falls as Lady Waycrest lets him down. She does not have any more health to siphon to him. You know, I'm used to Jack lets me down all the time like that, but both bosses do go down. And as you mentioned, now the trick here with the Gloom Horrors is, well, I mean, there's many tricks here, really. One of them is to get to a point kind of similar to the Atal Dazar pulls at the beginning with the Juggernauts, where they cannot jump on you. They're doing the same thing here. This is a very dangerous pull. We've seen some teams do this. So the Gloom Horrors are going to come in. We're going to see the healer Igloo here jump up on a ledge on the side to make sure that they cannot jump to their distant target. What this means is that it's going to increase an immense amount of damage on the tank, as he does not have a breather for that time. A lot of Shadow Claws going off as well, and the team's going to need to make sure to rotate a proper round of CC to make sure, crowd control of course, so that the horrors don't do too much damage. But I mean, they just chew through them no problem here.
Yeah, and they're definitely not trying to do anything efficient with their single target damage here. They just want to make sure those horrors go down as quickly as possible, because like you mentioned, the only real danger here is that tank going down. And that's what they do. They get through the AoE very quickly. We even see the rogue using his Blade Flurry, which he didn't for any other boss that they wanted the Unholy DK to do damage on. So just, you know, knowing the strengths of their comp here, very impressive. I like seeing that. I like seeing the rogue saying, you know what, I could Blade Flurry for a little bit more single target here, but it's just better for the Unholy DK. Stuff like that makes you know, the efficiency there is really nice.
A bit of a miss, unfortunately, for Igloo there. He missed his Typhoon on one of the Death Lens casts, so they had to supplement it with Lofus's Death Grip to make sure that one of the players is not stunned for the duration of that channel and taking increased damage. But Fullscreened here, having a full wipe again on the left side, up to 15 death stab, just not going their way here today in Sydney, Australia, as they have another full team wipe, getting ready to return back to Raw. They've already procced their 4th Reaping Wave, much of which is still alive throughout the dungeon, and it has an enormous aggro radius, so it's going to take them a while to get back, as they have a nice little RP walk over to the event right now. 40k here on Gorak Tool at 47% and looking to finish the job. They do have the remaining 8% that we talked about, Zyro, so the kind of inefficiency of backtracking that you mentioned will be applying to them here.
Yeah, and they do still have most of that hunter room that they left open there. I think they got maybe one of the side packs, 2 of the mobs when they were doing that massive maggot pull earlier. But I believe the rest of the room should make up that 8% there, so we'll probably see them pull that. They won't have Bloodlust for it, and we've seen teams in the past, mind you, it was the first cup week that it happened. We have seen teams not use their Bloodlust there and wipe, so we'll have to see if they're able to just make sure they get through it cleanly, because at this point, we're kind of looking at 40K. 40K is playing, kind of trying to apply to the rest of the tournament, because they do have that sub player. We're trying to figure out, are they in a state of mind to where they'll actually be able to compete with some of the higher up teams in this tournament?
Yeah, and at the beginning they weren't, talking to them, they felt they were at a disadvantage. They didn't have as much practice time. Their 5th player got in late, and I mean, truthfully, they didn't, right? They didn't have a 5th player here when the other teams were practicing, so this will hopefully be a very nice morale boost for them, because for them it wasn't just about beating Fullscreened, a team that also felt that they were at a substantial disadvantage, but it's about proving that they can do it cleanly and compete with, as you said, some of the upper echelon of teams here. Gorak Tool now entering the single digits of percent, 8% and 7% now on the board for 40K, as they're going to look to backtrack in just a second and finish off their trash. Fullscreen not giving up, though, as they have returned over to Rawl's room and are looking to try to finish off the 3rd boss.
And just looking at the time here, I believe this is a very solid time. This is in that 22, 23-minute mark that we see most of these teams going to. They do still have that 8% left to do, but they should be able to get through it pretty clean here in this tyrannical setting.
You say pretty clean, but we've seen overwhelming amount of disastrous pulls here in this Hunter's Lodge area. They do have the Soul Essences still available upstairs. I'm not sure that's going to be the full 8%. It's certainly not, as they rush over to some of the marksmen on the side and immediately group everything up together, making sure to line of sight any lingering explosives from the mobs as they grab in. Lofus making sure to grip the far marksman in so that doesn't sit there and just have any casts in the distance, getting it grouped up nicely for that shockwave and that Ring of Peace. Traps going down there left and right now. Shield wall has been popped here for Rentari, but they should be able to clean this up pretty quickly.
Yeah, and of course they're probably pulling a little bit more mobs than they need to, but just being efficient, because they do have that Unholy DK for the extra exponential AoE. So once one more mob goes down, they'll have the 100% trash percentage, and they'll be looking pretty good in this 2-0 against Fullscreened here.
2-0 indeed, as 40K does close out the series here against Fullscreened, sending them to the lower bracket for tomorrow and advancing to today's upper semis.
Strong performance here by 40K as they do send Fullscreened down. It's not the end of them, because we will be seeing them more tomorrow, and they will have the evening and the morning tomorrow to be able to practice, get themselves a little bit more prepared. But overall, 40K, at this point, they were doing what they needed to do with their new player. They weren't really struggling, it seemed, at all, and they were going through the most aggressive strats that they needed to make sure they were winning.
They didn't have to go that, like you said, Jack, they didn't have to go too crazy against Fullscreened, unfortunately, in order to get the 2-0. We'll have to see how Buff Warnerf Rogue and Method NA look in the next series to see if 40K has a shot against those two teams. That's going to be kind of like the real point of contention, where I think maybe Buff Warnerf Rogue could have the first real big upset of the tournament.
Entirely possible. That'll be a very tough task with how Method NA has been performing throughout Cup play. And I would say right now, Slew, we don't really have too many big surprises in terms of the performances. We haven't had any big surprises out of how these teams have been going so far.
No, I think everything's kind of fallen to a predicted plan. Certainly what Twitch Chat has been voting on. We all know the almighty Twitch Chat is absolutely never wrong. But if there was one match that was kind of up in the air, I would say Team D versus Abra. That could have gone either way. Unfortunately, we saw the face of Team D that we saw too many times in the Cup play, where they were just not on, especially in their second match, and that one slip up in the first round. But this next match, again, should technically be Method and A's, but you never know.
Yeah, and 40K didn't really have any issues at all throughout this entire dungeon, whereas unfortunately, Fullscreen did have quite a few hiccups where they didn't have any issues with any of their big pulls. They handled all the explosive orbs extremely well, taking full advantage of that Unholy Deathland AoE in these two dungeons, and doing a great job with all these pulls, just kind of maintaining a very healthy lead throughout the entire series. There wasn't really any point and time where I thought maybe they're at risk of losing to Fullscreen here.
Well, that's the thing I really like about a LAN environment as well, because you don't really know what your opponent is doing. So at that point, 40K was just executing the biggest pulls they had to. They weren't holding anything back, and the control that they had in particular there, is ironic, was really impressive on Rawl's room.
Yeah, Rawl's room, that's the big pull, right? That's the pull everyone looks back for. That's where all the clips come from, the 1 million DPS clips pull. Lofus did 800K without Bloodlust. He definitely could have popped that 1 mil DPS with the Bloodlust there, so I'm not really worried about that whole thing, Maybe he wants it later on in the tournament just for a clip for himself. But the control there's so much that's going on. They have to make sure they're getting their AoE CC down, which kind of falls to Adeq in that monk slot. He has to make sure he's getting his leg sweep, make sure he's getting his Ring of Peace, and the healer as well, Igloo, has to get his knockbacks done correctly, and he did it well. He's filling in well.
Yeah, and at that point, you also have to make sure your tank is going to be able to survive throughout all that chaos. And this is going to be asking Rentari that very question about that chaos on the very big pull. Take it away, Thist.
Absolutely. That was incredible. We all love seeing those monster pulls like the one against Raw. What were your team's comms like when you were doing that?
When we went into the pull, there was a lot more explosives than there usually is. So the comms were pretty crazy, and the mobs didn't really die at all because everyone was just attacking the explosives. But luckily, Igloo just healed through it, and we ended up making it at the end, even though it took a while.
Well, it was really exciting. If you want to just keep doing that throughout the tournament, I'd really appreciate it. It's exciting. So you added Adiq very late. How does he fit in with the rest of your team?
I mean, he came yesterday evening, so we didn't really have much time to play at all. But it's gone pretty well, at least this dungeon we practiced. And he fits in with the team, at least as much as he can do within, 4 hours of practicing.
Absolutely. So with that, what would you say your greatest strengths are within your team?
When we're on stage, we're really good at staying calm, and we're usually pretty chill when we're playing. When we practice, it's not that much, but just helps us get better.
Absolutely, and it really shows. Thank you so much for chatting with me. Back to the desk.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Thist. The 40K guys from Fat Shark, yes, have definitely been proving themselves throughout this. And at this point, Sours, do you think it's going to be enough for them to be a big matchup, a big threat against Method NA going forward?
Well, can I hold that prediction until after we see the next series?
Ooh.
No, but I think that Method NA is a very strong team, and I think that they feel very confident going into this tournament. I think they shouldn't have any issue really against 40K. They haven't had any issue against 40K in the past during the Cups, and I don't know if 40K has really improved enough compared to the Cups to really hold their own against Method NA.
I mean, yes and no. I wanted to kind of tout their horn a bit. I think that 40K, in our eyes especially, versus, at the beginning of the Cups when we were talking, they're, to me, one of the most improved teams consistently throughout the tournament, and they've proven it. Unfortunately, yeah, they were set back a bit with, roster swap and issues with their fifth player. But I think if they can manage to get their steam going just like they did during the season, but do it at a very rapid pace here for this weekend, then I think we could see a pretty competitive team out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they keep playing the way they played in that match just now, they're definitely going to be able to compete with Method NA, even at their best. The thing that I'm kind of worried about is they've had that limited practice time. They could have just put it all towards this first match and then kind of hope that they were able to fill the next, 2 matches worth of time to practice for the next series. So hopefully that's not the case, but I mean, I'm impressed with the way they played there.